exciting, isn't it? Let's see. Okay, right, so here we go. Here is my lovely clean white piece of paper that we're going to do a doodle on today. Now I'm going to be using fine liner pens as I normally use, but I think I'm going to use a little bit of colour as well on this one. So you can use colour pencils, you can use pens, whichever you feel motivated and feel like using. This one is going to I'm going to show you how to construct a kind of like a feather pattern, but out of really, again, very simple shapes that we would think of as like the curlicue shapes and the sort of S-bend shapes. But the first thing, if you want to do a feather, the first thing that you want to do is to create a spine for ourselves to work on. So that is very, very simple, sort of like an elongated S shape. So it's just a very, very elegant backwards, I should point out, S shape. Being dyslexic, I only notice it's backwards when I'm halfway through. Yes, that is a backwards S. So it's like, imagine a long, sort of sinuous kind of backwards snake of an S. And this is going to give us a spine that we can grow our pattern from. So the next thing we're going to do is take a point right down at the bottom, and we're going to put our first curl in here. So just another quite simple curl shape, and you can do any kind of curl shape that you like, but I think you'll see as we build up how the rhythm develops and what kind of size of curls you want to do. And then we're just going to tuck another one in alongside it, and then a third one to curl round, and that's, I'm going to give a slightly bigger curl to, a bit more of a kind of snail shell end. And then the next ones, they're going to gradually get smaller and smaller, and they're going to tuck down until they're touching the ground. And then the last one to kind of finish it off is a little kind of teardrop shape. And that's given us a start of a structure of sort of like, with a sort of like, I'm thinking very ostrich feathery kind of, you know, very poofy kind of feather. So for this next one, we've now got, we've got a spine here, but we've also kind of got the spine of the back of this one here. And you can use that in the same kind of way to build a pattern off. But we're going to start off down in the corner. So these curls are going towards the right. So this lot are going to go towards the left. So I'm just going to do a little small one. If you just let the size of the space you've got help determine the size of the curls, and if you kind of draw your pieces into the rhythm of the space that you've got, it will help to give your doodle the kind of, it gives it the right sort of feel and kind of energy. So you don't have to worry about thinking about size. You're just going to follow the sizing that you've got given to you by the space. I'm going to come up to about here. I'm saying this one, you can do curls, you can do non-curls, it's completely how you feel. And then with these ones, I'm going to take across the top here. So I'm kind of going to imagine a line that I'm working to, and they're going to get gradually smaller as we come across. So they're sort of like filling out the bottom half, or filling out the middle part of this feather. And as they come down, they're going to get smaller and smaller until they're just little tiny shapes fitting in around there. So now we've got this sort of quite nice sort of plume sort of shape happening. So we're going to carry on and move up with this way as well. So we're going to start with this little tiny section down here. So again, I'm just going to put a little teardrop shape just coming into that sort of corner, and taking my swirls up and across, kind of to meet the ones that I've got here to begin with. But you can decide if you want to have the same shapes, like curly shapes meeting, or you can have smooth non-snail curl shapes meeting, or, you know, or just completely mix it up. And I just want to come across until I've got almost to the end like that, and then I'm going to start piling them up, and they're going to come up and over the top. So I'm now going to start moving away and up the spine, and building up towards the top of this sort of S spine that we've got happening. And you can see this, the way that people draw like this, the way that these sort of feather shapes are constructed and built. They appear a lot in classic sort of, well, if you do that, by the way, I'm interrupting myself, if you get a gap like that, don't worry, just throw another one up to fill in the gap and it'll look absolutely fine. There you go. You get these a lot in Victorian textile designs. They were sort of developed out of the classical tradition. They're a motif often used in classical sort of Roman and Greek of artwork and sort of pattern surface design. They were rediscovered during the Rococo period, where everyone was looking back at those sort of periods, and then they were reused again by the arts and crafts movement, because they have this lovely kind of very natural feathery kind of feel. So as I come to the end here, I'm going to again go back to doing smaller ones and just going to tuck the ends in, and so I've just got one coming through the end like that. So you get this lovely rhythm coming through sort of the shapes, and you could imagine how you could easily put a second spine to kind of come in and wrap around the first one, or we could let's take some off the bottom of this one and see where that takes us. But again, really, it's just, I'm going to just change pens because I think these ones are old war horses of my drawing board, and they may be getting to the point where they have to be retired to the pen grow. I confess I'm really sentimental about pens, and it takes me a long time to throw them away after they've run out. They have like a sort of retirement home in the bottom drawer of my desk where they sort of moulder for a few months before I finally have to get rid of them. So I feel bad about just, throwing them out. So I'm just going to put, I think I'm going to put a second smaller kind of spiral coming in here to kind of curl round into that one there. And I'm going to then build up in the same sort of way, but these ones are going to be facing the ones that were going this way. So we're just going to take them just small kind of curl or teardrop shapes, just moving along. And when I get to about here, I'm going to continue. I'm not going to go to join them all that day. I want to leave a bit of a gap here. So I'm just going to let them curl up to the end sort of there. And then I can come into this section, just like this section comes in here. I can bring some small ones just coming up inside that circle. So we're going on the inside of this circle. I'm not going to try and get all the way inside that circle because I find it gets too congested. So I'm actually going to let these ones kind of peter out, going into a small sort of like teardrop shape like that. And then I'm going to come round, as it were, around the mountain, around that side. So I'm going to start, instead of coming right in from here, I'm going to bring some where I can just sort of like, I might just tuck another little one under there. Yes, so they're sort of coming in from there, and they're going to come up and round that way. And these are fantastically elaborate curlicues, but they're actually, again, once you've got the sense of the rhythm and how to build them together, they're not deeply complicated shapes to draw. They're quite nice, and you can sort of understand where they're coming from. They've quite got a nice rhythm to them, and they'll give you this fantastic sort of feathery kind of effect, which you can go on to elaborate in lots of different ways. But and you can change. I'm just changing a bit of direction there just to kind of get that final flick going over. And you can try all sorts of different combinations of overlaps and sort of curls, and I can just put that last one in there. And as I've now got this sort of second branch coming over, and you could go almost completely all the way around sort of the clock face, from north, south, eastwards, all the way around if you wanted to. But once I've got those sort of in place now, I want to think about a little bit of tone onto some of these to kind of give them a bit more form, because I've got all this nice detail happening, and I want to kind of work on top of that. So you could, if you want to get a really kind of feathery look, you could use your brush, your pen. If I do a little example one here, if you've got a curl sort of like that, you could do a couple there, do a little side study like that. You could come in with your line work and do just little flick lines like that to add some tone and texture, and that will also give that hint that it's a bit like the quills on a feather. It will give it that sort of slight feathery kind of feel. So that's certainly, if you want to stick to a line work, that's one sort of thing you could use. If you're really into the kind of stipply dot work that's people can do and take hours over, you can certainly use that on here, because if I start adding I'm going to do it very quickly just to show as an example, but if you just stipple in some sort of dot work like this and build up some tone, that really does give it that sort of very fluffy kind of feel like the sort of big heads of ostrich feathers have, like that. So they're all sort of fluffy and dotty. It does make my camera jiggle around, but having said that, I'm not going to do either of those this week. I'm going to use a bit of color instead to just sort of bring that in. So but both of those sort of techniques, you could certainly you could do those first and then you could add color on top, but I'm just going to use color pens as I've got some here. So I'm just using a marker pen in a pale blue color. I always have pale blue ones because one of my other side projects has a lot of blue in it. So I'm just seeing where they're thinking about where they're lying next to each other. So I'm just going to start off by adding a little bit of blue shadow along some of them, just almost like a sort of outline, just sort of coming across. And then I've got, I think that one's a bit on the dark side. I'm used to working on tracing paper with these where they look a bit lighter. So I'm going to come in just with this lighter one. This is, again, this is a nice set. They're called alcohol inks, but they have, this is a clear one that kind of blends the ink a little bit. It works better on a kind of shinier surface, but it just helps to slightly soften that line that you've got. But I'm just going to start just by thinking of like a line of shadow kind of coming through, and it can just tuck under. I always think of them as being like the chins, like you tuck under the chins of those feathers as they come round. And that's just going to enhance that, sort of exaggerate that sort of form by putting some shadow in that side. So this one here, because this has got this big plume here, that's going to become darker as well. That's going to become sort of a heavier line kind of going over. And I want something slightly paler than this color because it's quite heavy. I'm rooting down under my desk to find like a nice pearly pale gray. They've even got ones that are white, which I think might be a little bit pushing this kind of subtlety, but let me just see if I've got something. What's this one? Let's try this color. Oh, that's quite pale. Yeah, that's quite nice. So from that blue, I can just add in a sort of softer shadow. And this would work really well in color pencil and doing some shading with your color pencils just to sort of really blend those tones in. But I'm quite liking the way that looks, just to kind of get that little bit of shadow into that sort of surface. I think it starts making it look really quite nice and fluffy in kind of feel. So on this side here, where you've got this row coming around here, I would concentrate on getting those in between, and think about the shadow is going to be kind of on that edge, so it's sort of obviously going to come down below. And I think even if you're doing pattern and doodle for fabric and wallpaper design, it's really important to think about the way shadow does work, because however fantastical these shapes are, if you give them a basis in reality, it really helps people to read them and understand them. So yes, think about where the shadow would fall. So it would definitely sort of fall on that side, and then it would also just come under that little curl there, and it's going to fall round and along like that. And there we go. And then I can come back in with that grey and soften those shapes. Just give that an extra tone of sort of shadow. That becomes really nice and soft. I can just use, and I sort of like, so I've got two tonal areas of shadow coming through. And on the back of this one here, now that I can see that, I think I would probably put a little bit of that shadow in along that side as well, just to give that, because that's sort of bit having shadow cast sort of from down here. And on these ones, I might just soften that into a kind of round edge, so it's got a little bit of white on the top. And then as I'm moving up higher, again, I might go into, I think I'm going to go into these sort of, in between these sort of feathers, you get little diamond shapes or triangles where they meet. So I would take those into the background color of blue and move those, help to sort of give them as a shadow and push them back into the background like that, so you can just sort of start seeing them picked out. And then again, just start a little bit of shadow round the darkest sort of tone round the backs of these where they're coming round this shape, and it starts to get a lovely rhythm and a lovely kind of fat feel. And I think this would be lovely to do it in, really, I think this is where we get a really pastel kind of colours. So I just picked up blue because I've always seemed to have blue to hand, but this would be gorgeous doing it in sort of peachy tones, like real sort of old vintage kind of pinks and that kind of colour. And you could certainly add in some circles to your design that start to look like pearls and bits of jewellery and things, and that would be quite lovely for in some golds and adding a bit of, you can always add a bit of bling, that always looks good. So I'm coming round that sort of hoop here, and as I come round this way, the darker shadow is going to be cast down on these lower ones, on the ones from above, and I can just bring those in. That's it, and I can slightly where you've got this sort of curved shape here, if you slightly thicken that shadow into a sort of curve, then it's starting to really reflect the pieces above. And then again, I can come back with my grey and just darken these ones and just leave that white a little bit, put a bit more shadow on here as it's kind of like curling back round. And we should be getting quite a kind of soft, nice sort of extra shadow coming in to sort of soften that up, and just leave some little bits of white or some smaller bits of white at the top to kind of give that a really 3D feel. You can see here with these ones, if you sort of really swoop the shadow across the sort of back of the one below, that really helps to, imagine that's quite big, and I want to take a bit more shadow onto that one, and it gives it this lovely sort of 3D feel. You can see this kind of application of shadow on the sort of textiles and wallpapers where this was originally used. They used all these to give it this sort of feel of often using colours to make it look like gilded sort of carving and that sort of thing, because they were, of course, the commercially produced wallpapers that had these patterns were in themselves trying to mimic the handmade sort of printed damask wallpapers of the upper classes, because this was very much them trying to make these embellishments and details available to a wider audience as part of, which is what happened as we got more and more manufacturing and sort of mass production. They still looked back to these sort of very classical motifs for inspiration. Right, so we're getting a fantastic sort of like swirl going through that with plenty of kind of modeling of shadow. And you can see how, if you get a really nice one, it's really nice to have these kind of like repeated in a sort of mirroring each other. Obviously quite hard to achieve to get them to look exactly the same each time. So if you get one that's working really nicely, if you've got a scanner, you can scan it and kind of flip it together and turn it into a decorative border for something. Or you could look at some of the building up a whole picture like this and looking at some of the fabric printing sites, and you can kind of get them done as your own fabric or even wallpaper. In fact, if you go to Spoonflower, and there are other places available, you can have create your own designer wallpaper. It's not necessarily cheap, but for a feature wall with your own design on it, would be a fantastic thing to do. So I'm just going to very quickly put in a little bit of shadow into each of these. I'm just going to come round under there, and I get a little shadow under each one, and we are nearly done. I'm just going to put some grey in to soften this line up in the same sort of way. And just always think about, with the tone, it sounds difficult, but it's not really. Just imagine where the sun is hitting the light is coming from above, so the top end of your shapes are going to be cast a lighter, and they're going to be casting a shadow onto the ones below. So if you think about that, because there'd be a little bit of shadow here, and that one will be casting some shadow down onto that one there, and this one will be casting shadow, and so on and so on. And they're all kind of related, but you might just see a little bit of the lower down ones are going to be a bit darker than the top ones at the top, because they're going to be shadowed by all of the design that's above them. So when we get up here, we'll see shadow down under here, but the tops of those shapes here are going to stay quite white. And then as we come around the corner, it's going to be casting shadow down, and that curl where it goes under is going to be slightly darker because it's tucking away underneath itself like that. And there we go. So that is a gorgeous Rococo feather spiral, which I hope you can see. We could really build big sheets of this, and I just think this lovely curve here is really quite delicious. And so there we go. So I hope you have enjoyed my Rococo spiral. It's lovely, isn't it?
It really is.
It's beautiful.